Hi, this is Melanie from Artifact and Landmark. Today's topic is King, Son & Co., a glassworks that operated from about 1866 to 1891 on the south side of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were one of many glassworks that became U.S. Glass in 1891. Among collectors today, the company is known for its pressed glass tableware in both colored and clear glass. King, Son & Co.'s factory, warehouse, and offices were located at the corner of what is now known as 18th and Merriman Streets. The person who arguably most influenced this glasswork was William Campbell King. So we'll take you through the history of this company through the lens of his life. William Campbell King was born in Pittsburgh on July 20th, 1839, to David C. King, who was born in Germany in 1805, and Jane Campbell, born in 1810. From William's passport, dated 1874, we know that he stood at 5 foot 4.5 inches tall, had fair hair and gray eyes. We also have a picture of him from the publication Notable Men of Pittsburgh. His father, David King, operated as a pattern maker, which you can see promoted in this advertisement. He started his business in the same year as the birth of his son in 1839. David King would have produced the models used by foundries to produce their production molds. Models would have also been used for patent applications. A fun article from 1856 shows that the jeweler W. Wilson displayed one of D.C. King's models in his shop, and the model was of Isaac Craig's brick machine. Now, this jeweler Wilson was known and seemed to always be looking for creative ways to drive traffic into his store. D.C. King had his workshop at the rear of 72nd Avenue in Pittsburgh by the Fulton Brass Foundry, which you can see here on this map, and just down the street on Penn Avenue is where the Kings would make their family home for many years. Now, William was educated in local schools, finishing his education in 1859. Now, his graduation was also a milestone for Pittsburgh. He was one of 3 students to make up the first graduating class of Pittsburgh's first high school, Central High School, which opened in 1855. After William's graduation, he joins his father's business and will soon see the business name change from D.C. King to D.C. King & Son. At times, we also see the business just being referred to simply as King & Son. In about 1862, we'll see the family moving from Penn Avenue to Washington Pike Road, which is now Green Tree Road. You can see the location of their home on this map. After the King's families moved to Washington Pike, we see King's business interests grow. In 1866, we see the first mention of the Glassworks partnership of Johnson, King & Co. And we believe the 2 main founders or financiers of this business would have been Ralph Johnson, a prominent bricklayer, and William's father, D.C. King. This first mention of the business in a local newspaper was the Pittsburgh Commercial in August of 1866, and in the entry it shows that they're importing 15 barrels of lime by river. The partnership of Johnson, King & Co. would include William King, Ralph Johnson, James Johnson, David King, and many others. The Glassworks would operate under the business name Cascade Glassworks at the foot of Meadow Street, now 18th Street, on the south side. It would be located directly across the street from the McKeon Brothers Glassworks, which we've covered in another video. On October 15th, 1869, we see the partnership dissolve, leaving David King, William King, and Major George M. Irwin as partners. They're now operating under the name of King, Son & Co. William King's original partner, Ralph Johnson, James Johnson, and we believe Ralph's son, Thomas W. Johnson, start their own glasswork, operating as Johnson & Co. at the corner of Breed and 12th Street, which is the location of Alexander King's Glassworks. Johnson & Co. would only operate for a few years, dissolving in 1871. Although we lose track of James, we know that Ralph passes in 1901. Unfortunately, many, if not all his sons, passed before him, including Thomas W., who passes in 1879 at the age of only 31 years old. We can see in 1870 that William King's assets are $12,000 and his father David King's assets have grown to $62,000. Now his father at this point is 60 years old and William is 27 years old. In 1870, William's sister Euphemia marries their new partner, Major George M. Irwin. In 1870, we also see the company's first fire. It's reported that it started but was quickly and luckily contained to the pot room with little impact to the business. The loss was estimated at about $1,000 and was fully insured. We can see in this King's advertisement from 1869 that they're promoting a wide variety of pressed, blown, and cut glass. But around this time, we also see William King filing many patents related to pressed glass manufacturing, including glass pressing machines. And we see an early patent for a pressed glass design in 1871. This early design is known as the maple pattern and is described in the patent as having a pine cone resting on several maple leaves overlapping each other by the edges and having their apexes pointed outwards from a common center. You can also find many examples of this pattern at the Museum of American Glass in West Virginia. At this same museum, we can also see an example of their improvements to jars in this lid, which seems to have been filed with their patent. The patent itself was for the process of fire polishing the lid, which would give it a much smoother appearance. Through patents and advertisements, we also see the company busy perfecting jelly jars. Now, William was not the only one to file patents at the company. We see George Irwin file some patents, and some of these would have George end up in patent litigation. In 1870, John Ernest Miller of Duncan Miller fame joins the firm. He's running the mold department. So Miller will spend about 4 years working with King, Son & Co. And in 1874, he departs for George Duncan & Sons. Unfortunately, the next year, on February 12, 1875, D.C. King, William's father, passes. In that same year, 1875, King, Son & Co. obtains a patent for a design that will become known as the Centennial Pattern. And what's interesting about this design is it makes use of a new type of mold that was also patented, and which you can see here. In 1876, Pittsburgh throws a huge parade for celebrating the centennial, and it includes many of the Glassworks. King's Glassworks takes part with 5 wagons. In those wagons are both female and male glassworkers. In that centennial year, we know that the works has 2 furnaces, 20 pots, and 2 factories. And we can see the general layout of the works on this map. So a little bit more detail about King, Son & Co. In 1879, a book reports that the company has a revenue of $125,000, and as you saw on the map, they operate 2 factories, 2 furnaces, and have 21 pots. Their factories are powered by 2 steam engines with 2 buildings. They employ about 125 workers with aggregate wages of about $1,200 per week, or about $10 per week per worker. In that same year, 1879, we see Gregor Fox, who had been with the firm since its beginning, exit the partnership. He does this to pursue a political career, and with his exit, we see George B. Swift, who becomes the general manager. George B. Swift will remain a manager until 1889, and perhaps one of the most recognizable patterns of King is registered to both William and George Swift. It's known by collectors today as Banded Star. Unfortunately, in 1880, their partner, Jacob Zimmer, passes at the age of only 41 years old. In 1882, we see William's mother, Jane, pass. A few months later, William moves from the family home, first moving back to his old neighborhood on Penn Avenue, and he'll eventually settle at 360 Wine-Biddle Avenue. In 1883, unfortunately, we see another partner path, John M. Welker. Next year, in 1884, King, Son & Co. exhibits at the World Fair held in New Orleans. You can see the other glassworks exhibiting, which include Phoenix Glass, Thomas Evans & Co., and the Rochester Tumbler Company. Now, in August of 1884, the Glassworks experiences their first major fire. It's reported that it's due to a gas explosion. The factory is destroyed with a loss of $50,000. It's reported and perhaps speculated that it's due to a gas explosion. Now, the factory had been using gas for a while, so this somehow causes panic among insurance companies who decide to temporarily restrict insurance coverage to businesses that are using gas in their manufacturing. From this fire, we actually see in one article the importance of the molds to the business, and this is a quote from William. "The fire wouldn't trouble us much if we only had our molds, as we could erect sheds over the furnaces and go to work at once. But as it is, we will have to suspend operations until we can get a new set of molds, which will require considerable time. And as we had one of the finest tableware set of molds in this country, we are, of course, much grieved at the loss of them. But of course, King Son & Co. does have to fulfill orders, and so they do end up, according to a few articles, lease the old Crystal Glass Works factory that was just bought by Dithridge, which is at the foot of 17th Street, which you can see here on this map. The company also reorganizes that year in 1884, becoming King Son & Co. Limited. Old partners are bought out, which include Fred Schmunk, F.X. Fisher, and the estate of J.M. Welker. By 1887, we see that glass production has reached 205,000 versus 185,000 and 169,000 for the two preceding years. Now in 1887, we see another fire occurs, and this time it's reported that it's caused by a spark from a passing rail car. The destruction would have been total for their neighbor McKee, estimated 100,000, but McKee was actually already looking to move to Jeannette, Pennsylvania because of the death of Stuart McKee and the requirement to divide the property. So that plant will actually end up being owned by Dazzle McKee, the son to Stuart McKee. Now King's loss in that fire of 1887 would be again about 50,000. Around this time, too, because of these very devastating fires, the city has to consider whether or not they have enough firefighting power. And of course, William King, having had two of these devastating fires, does chime in, stating that he believed that part of his factory could have been saved had there been enough water available to put out the fire. In 1888, we see the company reorganizing once more. This time it will be King Glass, and it will be run by William C. King, George B. Swift, the general manager, and H. Lease as the trustees. Now it's unclear when William's brother-in-law, Major George Irwin, separates from the business, but we see him running an investment company, which will eventually go very badly for Major George Irwin and his investors. In fact, we see William at one point bailing him out of jail. We also see George taking charge as a manager of the Specialty Glass Company in East Liverpool, Ohio in 1888. Now, after the reorganization, George B. Swift, the general manager, departs the company in 1889. Now, then that same year, 1889, we see William C. King become a member of the Pittsburgh Clay Pot Company, which manufactures and deals in the clay pots used in glass production. This company also sells other glass manufacturing tools. 2 years later, in 1891, King Glass becomes part of U.S. Glass, with William becoming VP and then eventually secretary. He'll stay with U.S. Glass until about 1906. The King's Glass factory will become Factory K. At the same year, King Glass is acquired in 1891. We also see perhaps the final patent being filed by King Glass. It's for a jug, and you can see here it looks like pattern 500. And you can also see here the Heinz Museum actually has one of these in their collection. Now again, the King factory would become known as Factory K with U.S. Glass, and we're lucky that Dam 1 was being repaired, and they took a picture of the dam from the river, and you can see here in the background the U.S. Glass water tower. So in 1893, at the age of 54, he marries Cora Stell McMillan. So this is his first marriage. They'll first make their home at the same address at 360 Winebiddle Avenue. Now they'll have one son, which they welcome in 1894, and they'll name him William C. King Jr. And this is a picture of their son from his passport application in 1918. So although William Sr. Continues in business, he is slowly winding down his business interests. He does become director of the Lincoln National Bank, we believe as early as 1903. But again, this may be the last new interest that he takes on that's reported in the local newspapers. In 1917, the King family moves from Winebiddle Avenue to 1089 Shady Avenue, and they pay about $40,000 in cash to A.C. Stevens for the property. And you can see the location here on the map. In 1923, William C. King passes, and of course he leaves behind his wife Cora and his son William. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about King Son & Co. and its founders, and we'll be covering Alexander King and his Glassworks in the next video.